You are listening to John Henry Drums.
Because we aren't taught the truth about Black Reconstruction, we can't learn the much needed lesson from that moment in history, which is identical to today. And when you can't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it.
Many of us who have not studied, for instance, Reconstruction history, the history of the United States, particularly of African Americans during the 1860s and 70s, may think that we are entering a new era in American history. We may think that the things that we're witnessing today, the elections of blacks to political office and their appointment to various positions, their activities in various corporations, and so forth, is something new in American history. And yet, a study of Reconstruction history will quickly convince us that we are currently undergoing deja vu.
Many blacks during Reconstruction saw an opportunity towards freedom and liberation through the promises of equality under this system. In just 5 years, legislation was passed that appeared to be a moment of progression for black people in America. Just like today, blacks were given voting rights, civil rights. Blacks were holding government positions, and we were gaining back control of our life and labor. But what appeared to be progress began to unravel at the seams. As a people, the promises of freedom and equality started out with the disenfranchisement. Lincoln, the great emancipator, signed legislation to give slave plantation property that was confiscated during the war back to slave owner heirs, instead of giving it to those that toiled free on the land for centuries. Blacks understood that freedom on paper without owning land did not equate to true freedom, but dependency. In early 1865, General William T. Sherman met in Georgia with 20 black ministers, many of whom were ex-enslaved, and they expressed their need for land. So Sherman sent out Special Field Order Number 15, designating the entire southern coastline, over 30 miles inland, exclusively for black settlement. The stipulation was for each family to take no more than 40 acres. Within months, over 40,000 freedmen migrated to this area. Months later, in the same year, Andrew Johnson, president after Lincoln's assassination, would ensure that the land went back to slave owners, removing blacks from the land. Johnson would swiftly accomplish this with making the process easy for his southern constituents to rejoin the Union, allowing them to rejoin without a guarantee to uphold the new rights of blacks. So here they were, back in control of their land, but not in control of their once free labor force. So they implemented black codes, strategically entrapping Africans' labor back into the white power system, whether on the plantation or in the growing convict leasing system. Yet and still, with the disenfranchisement, after Constitutional Amendment 14 and 15 were passed, more blacks were voted into office in southern states than any other period in history. Blacks were willing to take this opportunity in hopes of guaranteeing their freedom. But Southern whites who grew tired of the social and political shift unified.
They're preaching to our kids in schools, these black savages are our equals. They're our brothers and sisters. I tell them they're crazy. We're white people. We're standing up for our white rights.
The Klan was born 100 years ago in Pulaski, Tennessee, as a 6-member social club. But 6 years later, the Klan had 500,000 members, and the burning cross, the Klan trademark, became a symbol of the violence it used to keep the newly freed Negroes in their place.
The 1860s and 70s was the beginning of some of the worst retaliatory mob violence against blacks in America. April 13, 1873 would reach a pinnacle in white terrorist violence during Reconstruction and would set a strong precedent of the federal government's complicity. In Colfax, Louisiana, a large group of blacks joined at the courthouse to protect the government officials' position after a close election. Over 300 armed white men came to the courthouse and killed hundreds of blacks and 3 white Republicans, many in cold blood. Using cannons, burning hundreds within the courthouse, and shooting those that fled. Of those 300 men, 9 stood trial. Of those 9, 3 were found guilty, and an appeal would later release those 3. The Supreme Court later ruled in U.S. versus Cruikshank, the leader of this massacre, that it was not the U.S. government's responsibility to protect blacks against simple murder. It stated that the 14th Amendment, the equal right protection of citizens, did not apply to the actions of individuals against individuals, but only to the actions of state governments. So the federal government was no longer responsible to prosecute white terrorist groups, which had become the military arm of the South. The ultimate agenda of reuniting these white power systems was slowly being accomplished, and leveraging the black population was no longer needed. So instead of the government sending more federal troops to protect their said new citizens, the North formed an agreement with the South, the Compromise of 1877.
The Compromise of 1877 is arguably the most devastating single government action in the history of blacks in America. This is when a group of politicians convened at the Wormley Hotel in Washington, D.C. to attempt to resolve the deadlocked presidential election of 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. They agreed that if Hayes were awarded the presidency, he would remove government protection of the black ex-slaves in the South and allow the former Southern slaveholding class to return to power. And in their return to power, we would be turned back to the plantation in a new form of slavery. This is the exact point in history when American whites collectively decided that black emancipation was a mistake, and from that point forward, blacks would never have freedom, justice, or equality in American society.
This was the green light to kill blacks with impunity. And by 1883, the civil rights that had been given were retracted, with the Supreme Court ruling that forbidding discrimination was unconstitutional and not authorized by the 13th and 14th Amendment. The illusion of freedom for blacks dissipated.
The laws don't protect anyone. And there are so many of us who believe that fair housing laws and and anti-discrimination laws, and civil rights laws, and voting laws, and so forth guarantee our freedom. What an illusion. What a flight into fantasy. Laws are no stronger than their enforcers. And the same people who pass those laws are the same people who are responsible for enforcing the law. And if the people then who enforce the law no longer decide to do so, the laws then are of no value and have no power. Ultimately then, fairness rests, and the fairness of treatment rests, not in laws, but in the activity of people, and in the attitude and consciousness of people. And if people who are responsible for enforcing those laws change their attitudes, then the treatment of those people whose freedom is protected by those so-called laws is now changed as well. You cannot put your faith in a white man's law and in laws enforced by whites. I have warned people many times that if it comes one day where the society has to make a choice between feeding white children and feeding black children, no amounts of civil rights laws or any other laws on the books will prevent those people from feeding their children first. It is a silly faith that we have then in laws. And for people in the 1970s and 80s and 90s to still rest their freedom on the basis of laws, when the very history itself shows us that this cannot be done, we must question their sanity and what they have learned from the study of that history.
Anytime we tie our freedom and liberation to the words and written promises of those that maintain a system that has historically disenfranchised us, we may be under an illusion. It only creates a powerless, dependent relationship, one that we've been a part of for centuries, one of the master and the other of the slave. So I'll leave you with 3 questions, and I want to see your response below. Can freedom ever be given? 2, can a group ever loan you your freedom through their promise or treaty or signed agreement or amendment that relies on their discretion to uphold it? 3, more importantly, is freedom ever freedom without having your own sovereignty to protect it? I want to know your answers.
What is the definition of freedom, justice, and equality for the black man, and where and when is it to be attained?
Well, take equality first. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't teach us to associate equality with whites. Equality has nothing to do with whites. We don't want to be equal with the white man. He's not the criteria or yardstick by which equality is measured. He's not in a position to tell us we are equal. It's not his right. It's not his to do. Equality, we want equality. We had equality before the white man was created. We had equality before the white man came into existence. And we want equality whether the white man is on this earth or not. Equality means the opportunity to develop all of our dormant potential, all of our dormant capability. And in developing this dormant capability, the right and the ability to stand on this earth on some land of our own and bring about a civilization and a society in which we will be completely independent, complete freedom to take care of the needs, to take care of the wants and the likes and the dislikes of our people, to establish our own nation, our own society, our own heaven, our own future. This is what we mean by freedom, by equality. And justice means as you sow, so shall you reap. If you do wrong, you'll get wrong in return. And if you do right, you'll get right in return. When you're in your own nation, in your own land, you're in a position